quick introduction, I've basically, before I started investing, I've spent most of my career in tech and product leadership roles across startups. So I've seen startups up through stages. I've been at companies at seed stage, early stage, growth, pre-IPO, post-IPO. I've pretty much seen the ride across all the startups that I've worked with. I joined Lightspeed 4 years ago as an investing partner. For those who have exposure to startups, I'm guessing most of you would. Some of the startups that I've invested in or I've been involved with are Uran, OK Credit, Setu, Pocket FM, Fresh Menu, and then a couple of other that are more sort of early stage, seed stage. I tend to do more consumer, SME, and fintech investments. Having said that, mostly sector agnostic, but look at all of these three specifically, just given my past experience. Before I moved on to investing, in my last role, I was heading product at Ola Cabs. I was the first product manager in the company, joined them before their Series B, and I was with them all the way till we were doing 1 million rides a day and we were valued at $5 billion in valuation. I pretty much built the product org in the company and most products ground up. I also spent some time at Zynga as a product manager where I managed global revenue for 2 of their flagship games. AdNear is another startup that I worked with here in Bangalore. That was a relatively short stint. And before that, I was working with startups which was sort of pre-MBA as well. So that's a little bit about me and what I've done in the past.
Interesting. I also read an interesting fact about your time at Ola, that you saw the hyper growth at Ola from 3,000 bookings to 1 million odd bookings. That was just fascinating.
Yeah, without a doubt, one of the best experiences of my career so far.
Amazing. Okay, so let's start, Harsha. We take the questions which we received beforehand, and then if we have time later on, we'll also take the questions which we'll get during the discussion.
Sure.
So we'll start with the questions pertaining to your past experience. So what are the biggest hurdles which you faced at Ola from a product management point of view? And if you have interesting anecdotes, learnings to share from your experience with Ola, Zynga, and AdNear, what worked, what didn't?
Yeah. So, my journey at Ola was basically a journey that involved sort of rapid launches. We launched several products in a very short span of time. Mm-hmm. Rapid launches coupled with rapid scaling, right? It was an unusual experience. I think that in itself was a big challenge from a product management standpoint. And that combined with other sort of more business specific challenges. For instance, you can scale, but you need to control burn. As you scale, suddenly your customer support costs go up. How do you control them? And how do you use product to make that happen? And I think scaling the org itself was also a challenge, right? The pace at which we were growing, sort of managing all of these products, scaling them, while also ensuring that we sort of keep hiring people and keep have enough bandwidth to manage these products at scale, was itself also a challenge. I got a taste of the challenges at Ola very early on, right when I joined. So if it's okay and if you have time, I'll share a quick anecdote. When I joined Ola, at that time, I was really hired for just the consumer app, right? And at that time, we had a very basic version of the product that was built by the founding team, and they wanted to upgrade it and sort of build something entirely new. And I wanted to get that sort of 0 to 1 experience, so I sort of signed up for it. And when I joined, I think I was told that, oh, by the way, this is not one app. We need to launch 3 apps. So we wanted to launch across 3 platforms, not just on Android. We wanted to do Android, iOS, and Windows. And then I was told that we had to do it within a month. And I said, okay, so those are 2 shocks. And then the third shock came when I realized that we had 2 developers. Wow. and no designer. and there were other developers, but they were on the back end. So at least on the app side, we just had two people, and they were Android first developers. And so and then I had this challenge to launch three apps, to redesign them with just two developers within a month. We managed to hit that goal. We didn't launch within a month. We launched in 2.5 months. But we launched across all three platforms. Within those 2.5 months, I scaled the engineering team from 2 people to 15 people, and including QA, and then also and also hired a designer. So that was quite a feat, to be able to pull that off in a short time frame. But that was Ola, right? Like that was the pace at which we worked, and I don't think that it was easy to beat someone like Uber if we didn't execute that way. And it came with its own challenges. It came with its own pitfalls, shortcomings as well. But in the end, it worked.
Wow. Wow. Okay. Do you have any specific learnings from your time there at Ola or Zynga or AdNear which you'd like to share?
Okay, that's fairly broad. Well, lots of learnings, I hope. But I think specifically more about early stage product management. And I've come to realize that early stage product is just different. It's just basically very, very different. You cannot read blogs and watch videos of product managers at large organizations and assume that you can just apply everything you read there to your day-to-day product management at an early stage, because early stage is so much about validating or sort of proving hypothesis. Early stage is so much about de-risking your product. Early stage is so much about speed of execution, that a lot of what you read out there just does not apply. I think that's been my biggest learning, right? That the 0 to 1 journey is a very different beast, and the way you approach it is very, very different from how you approach traditional product management.
Okay. Yeah, we have a similar question which says that at the early stages of product development, when creation is a priority, do you look into optimization? Do you dive into that, or you ignore that, or you just focus on the MVP that you're building?
Yeah. I guess let me try to structure this a little bit. So I think that early stage product management is okay. So think about what you're dealing with here, right? Like at early stage, you're dealing with less capital, fewer people, in unproven market. You basically have no customers or very few customers, and you're dealing with, if you're in the right sector or the right space, you're dealing with competition. And the reality is, and this is contrary to what most people will tell you, and it's just my point of view and it's based on my experience. Early stage is not a marathon, it's a sprint. You are basically backwards from your next funding, right? And your next funding round depends on whether you hit PMF before your competition does. Because the reality is that there will be 6 companies at seed stage, maybe going after the same idea, the same market. And by the time you hit Series A, there'll be 3 left. And by the time you hit Series B, there will be 2 left. And at Series C, or so on, it'll probably be a competition between those 2 until there's one winner, right? So the reality is that it's a funnel that keeps narrowing. And the only way that you get to the next phase of that funnel is if you get there first. So you're dealing with a time challenge as well. So you have fewer people, less capital, no market, and guess what? You also have less time, right? And this is why early stage product management is so much about, at least I feel it's about 80-20, right? You want 80% of the impact from 20% of the stuff, because you don't have the liberty to do the all of the 100% of the things you can do with a product. You only have resources to do the 20%. And then the question is, how do you use this 20% to deliver impact? So the way you prioritize is different. And you just don't have the luxury to sit and optimize. You don't have the luxury to say, oh, can I take this metric from, or can I take my, retention from, D30 from 10% to 12%? No, you have to take it from 10 to 15% or 20%. What will you do to make that happen? Because you have less time. So I think that the way you think about innovation at early stage is different, and the way you think about your roadmap is very, very different. I believe early stage roadmaps are about making sure you get the biggest bang for the buck, right? So you don't have the luxury to optimize or perfect features. You can only keep launching MVPs of all your features. And the reality is that MVP will deliver 60% of the impact, but unfortunately, you don't have the luxury to take it to 100%.
Okay. Yes. Talking about this, Harsha, what are the most common mistakes you see people making while working on their MVPs or building from 0 to 1, the early stage period during the growth period?
Okay. Early stage, I think the common one that I see is, I think what you alluded to in your previous question as well, is about actually there are probably two. One is sort of wanting feature completion. I've heard that often, where people want to do things just right, and while that ethic is great, it just does not work at early stage. You have to choose what you want to go after. I think that's one. Second is, I think fear or over analysis, right? Early stage, the reality is you have no data, and you don't even have a user base that's large enough that it will give you signals, right? So your only option is to experiment like crazy. So you need to be an experimentation machine. And your experiments are not the way you do A/B testing, right? Like the way you do A/B testing at growth stage is very different from how you do early stage experiments. Early stage experiments is really about, it's almost like launching 5 products out there within one product and seeing what clicks, right? So it's like launching 5 MVPs and saying what is clicking and then doubling down on it. So I think the mistake that I often see people doing is trying to do things sequentially, trying to build very deep hypothesis, very deep analysis, when the reality is that early stage is all about speed of execution. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't do your homework. You must talk to customers. It's important. You must have a hypothesis. If you don't have a hypothesis, you're just throwing junk out there. That's never going to work anyway. But I think that the pace at which you throw things out matters so much more at early stage.
Okay, understood. Okay, so moving on, the next question is about product versus tech engineering teams. So they say as a PM, you need to be very logical, you need to be data driven. Feeding to emotions also plays a big role. So how do you manage the differences if and when they come between the product and engineering or design teams? Yeah.
I think that
Have you faced any such friction in your experience? And
who hasn't? Who hasn't? I think this is common. Everybody will talk about it. I feel that I think in issues between product and engineering generally arise for 2 reasons, in my opinion. One is a mismatch in resourcing ability. So as an example, you have enough product managers, but you don't have enough engineers. So there are more ideas coming out, but there's not enough bandwidth to execute them.
Okay.
And because in a lot of companies, product managers are responsible for delivering metrics, you get you go into this cycle where you constantly keep blaming engineering for not delivering. And the reality is that the issue is on hiring, right? That, where you've just not planned hiring well enough. And if you haven't, then you need to go back to your metrics and realign and say, not doable, right? I think the other is I think also a little bit of a philosophy alignment between, at least I feel, between people that are heading product and people that are heading engineering. And I feel that it stems a lot from the hiring process. For instance, I am a big believer that if you're hiring an engineering head for a certain unit, that person needs to be interviewed by the product head of that unit, and vice versa. If you're hiring a product head for a unit, they have to be interviewed by the engineering head. And unless the two feel that they can get along and that there's going to be chemistry and there's alignment of philosophies, it'll be hard to deliver anything. And the reality also is that once you have that alignment, you need to keep fueling it, right? So how, and this goes a little bit into softer aspects around maintaining camaraderie, spending more time together, empathizing, understanding each other. Those are things that happen only when you spend more time with each other outside of the office. So I feel that those are two or three things that both impact chemistry between these two teams, and are also critical to ensure good chemistry between the two teams.
Okay. So talking about that itself, we also had questions around what do you look for in a product manager while hiring? So are there any specific things which you look at? And so this question here, where do you find the best product people? Are they MBAs, are they techies, generalists? And any advice to keep in mind in hiring those folks?
So, I think that one common misconception that people have is, that product managers are the voice of the customer. And I don't think that they are just the voice of the customer. They are just as importantly the voice of the business, and they are the voice of all other functions in the company. And so, if you just believe that all that a product manager has to do is understand his customers, then you kind of over index on his design ability and on his ability to make sense of the numbers that he's seeing, right? Because the numbers are telling you a story. But the reality is that when you put this mix of the fact that a product manager also needs to understand business and he needs to understand all of these other functions in the company, and then he has to strike a balance, right? So I feel that, like, if you prioritize something that your customers want but it will not deliver value to your business, there's absolutely no point doing it. And so you're really looking for people who have the ability to, at senior levels, and at junior levels, the desire to understand how business works. And you hire, I also feel that product managers that rank high on empathy and that rank high on relationship management, at least for me personally, they at least like historically I've seen that they're able to deliver a lot more than product managers that spike on analytical ability. So obviously analytical ability is table stakes, but I feel, at least I personally prefer to hire product managers that spike on relationships and empathy, because that's when you really get shit done. And just sort of, if you spike more on analytical ability and less on the other stuff, not so much. At least that's my point of view. I think that the other that's important is, when you think about where to hire from, is it's a function of what stage you are at, whether this product manager has seen that stage. Like one of the mistakes that I've seen people make is when you are in early stage or growth stage, but if you hire expertise that is more from MNCs that are not necessarily seeing the pace that you're seeing in the company, then you typically find yourself in a place where there's mismatch in expectations, right? And a mismatch in experience or ability to handle this fast-paced environment. So I feel that it's very much a function of the stage that you're at, and I think also a function of the business model that you have. Another example I'll give you is product managers that have worked in pure play product companies don't necessarily enjoy themselves in companies that are ops heavy, right? And that affects their ability to deliver, and vice versa. And I'm not saying you shouldn't hire product managers that like are from an ops company if you're a product company, and vice versa. But I think that you want to keep that in mind, and at least be sure that this person is committed, and will not find himself out of place. And one good way, at least in my opinion, of testing that is typically my product management interviews used to be brainstorming sessions. So I would actually take a problem statement and just spend like an hour and a half just trying to, arrive at like, a basic design or an MVP. And it would be more of a discussion, right? Like where it's not a questioning, it's just sort of me and the PM sort of working together on trying to solve a problem. It gives me a sense of his style, as well as whether he's somebody who would enjoy this line of business.
Okay. I think somewhere in there you also address this question, which says, how do you effectively use customer feedback to make changes to your product? So like you mentioned that if that feedback doesn't add to the business, then it doesn't make as much sense to add that feature or build on that. Right?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of aspects to the customer feedback is a trap, by the way, and it's a trap that people fall into so often. Because the reality is you need to take feedback, but customer feedback is not your product roadmap. And it's it's easy to say, and you read about this often, but you'll be surprised at how often it ends up becoming your roadmap. I think that, first of all, you don't take customer feedback until you have some hypothesis about what's going on in your business. And you can't have that hypothesis unless you're first sort of doing the work and going through your data and really sort of trying to form a point of view on what you want to understand. And then once you get feedback, all you know is what's happening on the ground. You don't know what you want to do with it. I'll give an example. When back at Ola, we had suddenly seen a jump in denials, right? So a lot of our drivers were denying rides to customers, and there was a spike in the numbers, and we just didn't know what was going on. Like, why were drivers denying rides? And typically, that sort of the reasons that you got from customers and drivers didn't quite convey a story, right? So you couldn't. It was a mix of different reasons, and you couldn't quite tell what was going on. So we decided to talk to our customers and specifically to drivers to understand what was happening. So we did some work, right? So one thing we realized was that the timing of denials was conspicuous. We noticed that the spike started happening after we launched the Ola Money wallet, right? And then we said, okay, so all right, so we've launched wallet. Clearly, there's something wrong with this wallet. Drivers are not liking it. But what could possibly be happening? So we didn't just sort of take that and now went to drivers and say, okay, what's going on with Ola Money wallet? We actually did more work, and we said, okay, at what time are we seeing more denials? And we noticed that we were seeing more denials, for instance, in the morning and in the evening. And so, after some data work, so we had narrowed down to understand what we wanted to focus on when we spoke to drivers. And it was not just Ola Money, it was using Ola Money in the morning and in the evening, and really try to get to the bottom of what are these drivers doing in the morning that is keeping them from taking rides, and what are they doing in the evening that's keeping them from taking rides. And that's when we understood that a lot of the drivers in the morning would sort of fill gas in their car, and they wanted cash to make those payments. They didn't want money in the wallet. And in the evening, a lot of the drivers were actually rejecting rides, actually not because of Ola Money, but because they wanted to go home and these rides were not on their way to home. And now the answer to this was not that, you stop giving them Ola Money rides in the morning, or that you stop giving them rides that are not on their route. Like, those are not sustainable answers. Eventually sort of the answer to that ended up being that, we had to do two things. One is that we had to sort of get cash in the bank for drivers within 24 hours. So we couldn't wait 2 days. In those days, it was generally T+2, it would take time. And so that's one. And second is, over time, we also launched like a card product for the drivers where money would go directly into their cards. So they could pay, they could sort of refuel or use the card anywhere to make any purchase, right? And on the evening routes, it was not about not giving them those rides, but maybe pricing those rides differently if the driver had to really go out of the way, and changing our algorithm for how we allocate rides as well. You want to allocate rides to drivers that will be on route. So I think the way you think about customer feedback, how you go about deciding what you want to ask your customers, what do you want to know, is a journey, and it's an exercise that involves hypothesis analysis, questioning, and then brainstorming to identify solutions, right? It's often that you get this influx of customer feedback and customers are asking you for 10, 20 features. You can't just go out and build all of them. It's a whole process.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Some really interesting insights in there. Uh, okay, moving on to the next question. What is the current scope and growth of product management in India, and why do you think what do you think is specifically lacking right now?
I don't quite understand this question actually. Do you mind elaborating a little bit?
Yeah, so current scope and growth of product management. So lately there've been a lot of talks around India becoming the product capital of the world, from tech to product as well. So how do you see that unfolding, and what's the scope that you see? How does the future for in product management look to you?
Um,
Yeah. So
I'm very excited about what's happening in India right now, and I'll tell you, I still remember back when I was at Ola, it was hard to build out the product team because product management was relatively early in the country. It was new, and it was you it was hard to find people. And I think the other thing was, despite all of the work that we were doing at the time, just how grossly people underestimated talent. Because the belief was that, Are India mein, matlab, what do these people know? What are they doing? But the reality is, Ola did what it did, and it beat Uber and became sort of the leading cab company in India for the longest time. And all of that was with product managers who had no experience in the valley, who learned on the job and scaled themselves, right? And I think today we've come a long way. So I see past product managers that are now entrepreneurs, repeat product managers that have seen sort of this growth phase journey, early stage journey, and are now part of startups. And you can sort of see sort of the impact that they're immediately having on these companies just because of their past experience. And then I'm really excited about just all the knowledge now that's flowing in, and how this community, especially I feel, at least in Bangalore, how the way it is building up and how people are so open to sharing. You see sort of you see people writing more, you see people sharing more, there are meetups more often. We're a very different group of people now than we were even 5 years ago.
Wow. Okay. Wow. Okay, moving on to the next question. As an investor, what are the metrics you look for in an org to understand the potential of the product? And as an investor, as a VC, what are the things you look for while evaluating a MVP or a really early stage product?
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to say anything very different from what you probably read or heard before. But I think at when I'm looking at a startup, obvious signals come from, obviously, organic growth. This is specifically for consumer companies, but organic growth. And one that I rely on quite a bit. And even though there's not a lot of data, I think it's just how I'm wired is on cohorts, because I think cohorts not like tell you so much about um, the team that's building the product, right? Cohorts tell you about the pace at which they're improving this product. The cohorts tell you whether their instincts have been right, right? More often than not, because then you'll see the progression in numbers month over month, and also, if you see cohorts improving month over month, and you see sort of and again sort of cohorts across multiple dimensions, right? So not just users, but maybe if it's a revenue making company, then on revenue and on engagement and on all of these parameters, and you start to get a sense of what the team is prioritizing. You start to get a sense of whether their instincts are right more often than not. You start to get a sense of the speed at which they're executing. And then of course, undeniably, you get a sense of whether there's a receptivity on the demand side, right? Whether the customer is responding. Um, so I think I tend to rely a lot on cohorts. But having said that, I also think that early stage, the reality is there's not a lot of data. And so um, in my mind, I feel like the team or the people that are building the product, that sort of trumps everything else. And I'm typically sort of right team in the right market kind of a person. And then sort of second order on the numbers and the metrics. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Let's move on. I think we've discussed this where you find the best product people. Should you build for scale early on? How to take your product through transformation when scaling? What are some of the challenges? I think I've spoken about this as well. What to focus on? This is an interesting one here. Sometimes when scaling, startups outsource a function to partners rather than hire internally. In your opinion, what functions should one perform or not perform internally? So, anything which you've seen work better, outsourcing tech, outsourcing design product, and at what stage do you think it's best to start building it internally?
I think that I think that like most startups, you don't quite have the luxury to outsource a lot, because you're really trying to save money as far as possible. You're trying to be frugal. So outsourcing is very rarely an option. Um, I think that for more advanced stage companies, you should outsource whatever is not core to your business. Whatever is a good to have but not must have. I think that a tricky one, for instance, is customer support, right? Like a lot of companies get away with outsourcing customer support. And there are arguments both ways whether you should or shouldn't do it. But it's not your primary business. That's not your expertise. So it may be okay to do that, right? If you are, if you don't have a roadmap to build financial services, then something like a wallet that's just an add-on is not something that you want to sit and build, right? So you could potentially just outsource that. So as an example, if like this is just hypothetical, I don't really know, but if Big Basket needs a wallet, and unless they have a financial services roadmap, why would you sit and build that in-house, get a license and everything? You should just outsource that or partner with somebody to do it. You see a lot of businesses, for example, even sort of they want to launch a credit card solution for their users, or a gift card solution for their users. Again, if it's not core to your business, you just sort of partner with a vendor or an API provider and do it through them, right? Like you shouldn't have to build that out in-house. I think at early stage, you don't have the luxury to do things that are not must have anyway. So you don't outsource anything. But I think as you advance, the choice is really based on whether something is core to your product and it will have a life within the company, or is it just an add-on? I think that's how I would think about it.
Okay. Okay. Another interesting question here. So you've been a product manager as well as a VC now. How does scaling look like on the outside versus the inside? I think another interesting aspect could be as a PM, you must be building for certain metrics. But as a VC, what are the metrics that uh, you look for, which could be more interesting? So, do you see a shift from building from as a PM or evaluating from as a VC standpoint?
Um, surprisingly, there's not a lot of difference in terms of what I look for, right? I think I guess the difference is also that, like, as a product manager, you think about both the output metrics and the input metrics. But as a VC, you only think about the output metrics, right? I think that's probably how I would define the change. But like how you would define impact or output metrics would be the same, right? So um, I think that you think a lot about you think a lot about strategy. You think a lot about, if you want to scale, what is the right way to do it. You think a lot about prioritization, what matters most um, in the current market. You actually think a lot about uh, competition, growth investors. um, you think about macroeconomics. You think about the overall sentiment, what will work, what will not work. I think you apply all of those filters as a product manager. You should ideally, uh, and you also apply, at least as a product leader, you should. um, and you apply those filters even as a VC. And then you sort of decide what matters most to the company, right? And if you're aligned on what matters most to the company, then ideally, in a product first company, product leaders would have the same goals, same objectives. To give you an example, um, the number of rides for Ola, for example, was a key metric not just for the CEO or for the supply side team. It was also a key metric for me, right? And for me, it translated then into, okay, how do I acquire users? Do I spend time on referrals? Do I let marketing team sort of get these users? What does that mean for our economics? I think those are all decisions that you take. I think the only difference is, and those are all things that you think about even as an investor on the board of a company, right? Like, what is the right thing to do? And at least when the company is presenting their annual plan or their quarterly plan, you want to hear that these nuances have been thought of.
Yeah.
I think the difference, although, is I feel like even the company is doing, whether the company is doing well or is not hitting their targets, you know as an investor, you feel the same high as the founder, or you feel the same pain as the founder.
Mhm.
But you know uh, you're doing a lot less work, and that's the reality, right? As a VC, you share what you hear from the market. You share all the options that are available. You help with decision making. You apply some of the same filters that a product leader would apply for
Yeah.
this decision making. But in the end, execution is the tough part, and the reality is you're not doing that.
Yeah.
So your life, you're shielded from it, and your life is easier. And that's the reality, right? Like, it's the team that's doing all the work.
Yeah. Okay, so in the chat right now, along similar lines, a fun question is coming. So Deepak is asking, what is one thing you miss from product management career after moving to VC? And what is the one thing that you love the most about your current role? So, yeah.
What I miss is, I think that I feel that as a product manager, there was constant action in my life. Like, every day or every week, or every sprint cycle, I think I was either achieving something or failing at something, and I was constantly like chasing something.
Yeah.
As an investor, there's a lot of wait and watch, right? So I think that you kind of sometimes sort of miss that regular high. Um, and what is the one thing that you love? Sorry, by the way, I have a 2-year-old in the background, so please ignore. He tends to scream.
No,
Um, what is the one thing you love the most in your current role? I think the I am I feel so fortunate to I've always loved to work with startups, and I've always loved to build companies. My career has been just about that. And I think that I feel fortunate that I get to do it day in, day out, and not just work with one company, but I work with several at the same time. I think that, that's
Okay.
the best thing about this job. And I think the related aspect is also just how much you get to learn, right? You cannot support your companies unless you're going deep into their business and really trying to understand what's happening in that market. It's constant learning, and now it's sort of learning plus plus, right, compared to when I was in a product role where I was sort of going deep, for example, at Ola, just going deep in transportation, or at Zynga, sort of going deep in gaming. But here I am today where I have to be deep in consumer and SME and fintech, and maybe four other type of content businesses or food tech and so on, and I need to sort of really, really understand what happens across these businesses. So it's a lot more cognitive load, but I also think it just helps you learn a lot, which is always great.
Got it. Perfect. Okay. Another question which has come in, pretty interesting. What is the social currency that PMs can earn outside their work? So, for example, designers have Behance, engineers have Stack Overflow, GitHub. So, uh, data scientists have Kaggle Score. So, what are things that you can do to earn that social currency as a product manager? So, you mentioned early on that a lot of blogs have been coming out lately. So,
Yeah.
like those which PMs could focus on to build their own recognition.
Yeah, I feel there are places. There's Hackaroon, typically sort of quite well respected. I've seen some interesting product posts there. I think that there is. I feel like it's so easy now to just have your own website, just write. You
Correct.
know, all of us have interesting thoughts. Just put them out there.
Yeah.
Um, I think Twitter is a great platform. You find some of the brightest minds there, and it's designed beautifully to allow you to follow some of the brightest people, learn from them, and also showcase what you've learned, right? And get noticed by the right people as well. I feel that in this day and age, you just cannot not be active on Twitter. Especially for a lot of folks dealing with startups or tech or product. I think it makes so much sense to be there. It's the place where people just come to share knowledge. um uh I actually personally find Product Hunt great. Like if you're somebody who likes to tinker with things, I remember I used to do that, just sort of build things on the side, work with some developers, just curious about something, throw it out there, see what people say, how do they upvote, right? I think that's interesting. I actually think Quora is also interesting, although um uh I guess debatable. People have different points of view, but Quora is interesting again. If you can choose your specialization again, sort of showcase what you've learned and share. I think those are all ways to earn social currency in product. Um, yeah, but I'm hoping there'll be more platforms. I hope we build some in India.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So moving on, we don't have much time left. I'll quickly take these questions. How has your past experience as PM shaped the way you think about the companies you invest in, and how it might different for a VC coming from a different background? So, having been a PM before, what edge does it give to you, or what are the things has that have shaped the way you look at startups when you look at investing in them? You've got the same question on the chat as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Someone having investment management experience. Okay. Um, yeah, I think that over time, I guess any product manager will say this, like you develop a muscle to uh, you develop well, I guess your instincts develop a lot as you keep doing this job for years. You start to get a sense of what will work and what will not. And I think that's the biggest superpower that a product manager has, right? To be right more often than not. Which is basically, translated to you have better instincts than most people. But I think instincts is one. I think ability to extrapolate from what you're seeing in numbers, right? Like whether these numbers will sustain because you know what questions to ask to decide whether for example, the pace of growth, whether that will sustain or not. You know what you want to look for, right? You want to look for, organic growth loops. You want to see, aspects that are, giving virality to these products, or you want to see word of mouth happening, but you kind of know where you want to dig further. I think mostly, I think the experience of being a product manager sort of helps me more at early stage in terms of sort of understanding whether it's an area I'm interested in exploring from an investment standpoint.
Yeah.
And I think that it's mostly my experience working with early stage companies and growth stage companies that helps with sort of more managing portfolio, right? Post investment. But I think the product manager experience specifically helps in the decision phase. And I try very hard, and I kind of make sure that I don't wear that hat when I'm on the board, because that's not my job. And I do not want to interfere when founders are doing what they're doing best. So try to make sure I'm not a product manager when I'm in a board meeting.
Okay. A lot of people had this last question, which says, any advice for a PM looking to transition to a VC role, or other than PM, marketing people, sales people looking at transitioning to a VC role? So what are the things they should be clear about, they should have thought about before making the move, or which would help them understand if they're the right fit or not as well? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
A big part of this job, is big part of the job is sort of making sense of information that you're getting from multiple fronts, and sort of helping your companies navigate um, tough environments, and being able to give the right guidance, because you can make sense of everything that's happening around you. And I think a lot of that is at least I personally believe, is a function of what you've seen in your career, right? Now, if you want to be in venture, I think there are multiple ways to do it. One is, that you join early on, right? You basically start as an analyst or an associate, and then you move up over time.
Right.
And that gives you the same experience. It gives you this experience of being able to make sense of information from multiple angles, see what's coming, because you've seen companies in the fund's portfolio do well, not do well. You've learned from the mistakes that have been made in the past. And so by the time you become a partner, you're ready to do justice by the companies that you work with. And the other approach was really one can argue was my approach, although I never planned to be in venture capital. It just happened. But which is, because I had spent so much time working with startups, it was the same story for me, that I got used to sort of seeing what happens in markets, what happens in tough competitive environments, what happens when funding goes dry, what happens when you are in a cash crunch, what happens when you hire the wrong people. Sort of had seen all of those mistakes, and because of that, I could um, help companies a little bit through their journey, right? I think that's one, right? So prepare yourself to be able to do that. So irrespective of what background you're from, I think in the end, it's about building that muscle. And I think the second is, as I said before, I feel that the transition in the early years, especially if you've been an operator before, can be very hard, because if you've been an operator who's worked in startups, right? Like the life at a startup is so much more fast paced, so much excitement. Just, it has its good and it has its bad. But, if you're someone who's used to that adrenaline, it gets difficult, because venture can move slowly, or can at least appear to move very slowly in the beginning. And so I think that's something to watch out for and to be sure of. And the reality is that, until 3-4 years, you probably won't even know whether you like venture, because that's how long it takes to find the right investments, to see if they're doing well. You won't even know if you're doing good at it until 3-4 years. So it's a lot of commitment. So be sure you are ready to make that commitment and make that switch, because it's a big mental switch. I think those two are critical. you know, I think that the third, if you're serious about making that commitment, you feel that you've got the experience that's required, you're ready to make that commitment, you know it's a risk, you know it may or may not work out, which is fine, you're ready for it. I think the third is just, very, very actively start building your network and start building your brand, right? What do you stand for that will give you quote unquote deal flow, right? Why would people want to tell you about interesting companies?
Yeah.
The credibility, right? So a lot of that is not just about the work you did, because the reality is, all of us are doing such incredible work. People are not finding out about it, and a lot of that is now about personal branding and personal marketing. And fortunately, there are tools up for that now. So
Yeah.
I think those three aspects is how I would think about if if one is considering venture capital.
Got it. Nice. One interesting question which has come in is what are the resources you refer to for user research or understanding markets? Any links to people or articles or any apps that you follow? As a PM, what are those apps that you really want us to explore and uh, to understand, or the people you want us to follow, the blogs, to understand markets and get a better understanding of user research?
Um, a lot of these. So I wouldn't like for product managers. I wouldn't advise just subscribing to sort of user research newsletters, columns. There are a lot of sort of actually research firms that publish newsletters on a regular basis. So you
Mm-hmm.
can subscribe to those. And there are a lot of analysts that do sort of public market analysis of specific sectors, companies, and you can sort of read those as well. But you obviously want to be specific to your industry. So it's hard for me to share any links. Um, I can probably, if it's okay, Ayush, I guess after the session, I can probably point you to some research firms that have interesting newsletters that people can subscribe to.
Yeah.
Um, I can do that, and then, but I think it'll be very subjective, right? It'll be a function of the industry that you're in. Uh, there's a ton of information out there. I wouldn't want to generalize. You have to be careful. Like I'll share links, but you very easily and quickly get overloaded with a lot of data, and then
Yeah.
not all of it makes sense to the day-to-day business. So
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. One question says, what was the moment where you decided to be a VC? Was there something which triggered it, and how easy was it for you to transition into a VC role?
I wasn't decided. I when I moved out of so I had a framework when I moved out of Ola for what I wanted to do,
Wow.
and I so there were two aspects of this framework, right? One was what areas or industries I wanted to be in, which was a function of where I thought there will be spike in the coming years.
Mhm.
So this is back in 2016, I thought um, video content, OTT would be huge in India. I thought that chat-based platforms will be big and there can be full-fledged products that will be built on it. And I think there was a third area I can't recall, but after some work, those are the two or three that I zeroed in on.
Mhm.
Fortunately, they've panned out now. Fortunately, it's worked out. But those back then, those are the ones that I shortlisted for
Yeah.
myself. And then the other area was um, where would I learn the most, right? So what is it that I lack in my skill set if I want to keep making progress in my career, and where will I learn the most? So there was a lot of self introspection to say, what am I bad at, right? And I realized for myself that I was very good at going deep, but I was not very great at going broad and having the 30,000 feet view. And that's what I wanted to learn. And I wondered whether that is knowledge that I will get at an MNC, whether that's a knowledge that I will get at maybe firms that were larger than Ola, but not necessarily MNCs yet. Would that be knowledge would that just be an environment I would be exposed to if I left India, if I moved out of India, right? Like those were all questions that I asked. And then the fourth and a very realistic option at the time was also, well, should I start up? Because if I'm a founder, I will be forced to think about the 30,000 feet view. I don't have a choice. Um, and those are all the questions that I asked myself. I had an offer to head a product for Amazon Prime Video in India at the time, and I was I realized that while being a founder would help me fill the skill gap, I knew broadly what areas I wanted to be in, but didn't necessarily have a very clear idea of what I wanted to build. I also think that maybe I was a little risk averse maybe at that time. And incidentally, a couple of VC firms started to reach out because I think maybe either they thought that I would start up or maybe they wanted to consider me for portfolio companies. I don't know what the reason was, but they did. I started talking to a couple of VC funds, and I remember talking to Lightspeed and telling them about my points of view on these two or three sectors and why I thought these would become big. And I remember talking to Bejul, the MD at Lightspeed, and he said, you speak like a VC. And I said, interesting. And he said, maybe you should be a VC. And I said, okay, maybe I should. And as I thought about it, I realized that it was the perfect place for me to fill the skill gap that I thought I had. And I hope that I'm making good progress on that front.
Looking at how the OTT and chat-based platforms have turned out, your bets were clearly bang on. I think Lightspeed have you clearly. Yeah. So yeah, I think this would be a good time to wrap this up, Harsha. Just one last question: do you have any message for startups out there, people working remotely, building products in these critical times? Anything you'd like to share or say about that?
Say about working remotely?
Working remotely or also building products in these times, especially when things are so critical and
yeah.
Yeah.
I feel that this is a difficult phase for a lot of companies, but so much of a product manager's job is about turning a tough time into an opportunity. Um, I feel that if you haven't already, then I would suggest spend a few cycles thinking about whether you should reprioritize things on your roadmap, whether you should completely reevaluate your roadmap, and is there something entirely out of the box that you should go after? Because now is the time to try it, and you could probably change the face of your company. I feel that now is the time to be fearless and to try more and to um, be a maverick. So I think it's an opportunity also because you're kind of in a silo, you're by yourself, and it's probably a great time to just sit and think. Nobody's pinging you a lot. Nobody is, there's probably, depending on which sector you're in, maybe not a gun to your head right now, a great chance to just sit back and think and take some chances. So if you can reprioritize and innovate, now is the time.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you so much, Harsha, for your time. This was really interesting, and thanks so much for sharing your experiences and telling us how to go about things from those. Really glad.
Sure, no problem. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, and thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you. Yeah. To everyone else, I'll just share the meetup group link so you can stay updated. I'll also share my Twitter handle if you have any feedback for us. Harsha, if you don't mind, can we share your Twitter as well for people to reach out and
Sure.
follow? Yeah. Okay, we'll do that. Okay. Thank you so much, Harsha.
Thanks. Bye. Bye, everyone.